One thing he needed to do from the door is cut that hair. This probably your homie. He look like he from Jersey.
Yo,
sound like you from Jersey.
I'm letting y'all know, Mona is my mentee. Just give her 6 months. In 6 months, we gonna get it together.
They went ahead to the wall after I told you leave Dwayne alone.
I feel you, but audience is gonna be probably a 4-year process.
Mona takes over the Joe Budden podcast. On the recent episode of the Joe Budden podcast, they might have had their best episode in years, but there was a lot of hiccups along the way, and it shows the value of Mona, but also the downside. So this episode started off like any other episode, and it was really just normal. But then around the 2-hour mark, boy, does Mona start to take off. She would go on these wonderful isolations where her comedic flair really shined. And she would even do funny things like read Ish's style of potting, and she was exactly spot on.
Ish framed everything, no matter what the he gonna say, like it's some heavy. And then he might hit you with, he might hit you with, can I finish?
Mona's flair for comedic timing might be the thing that takes the Joe Budden podcast past the break down every other topic and just be political all the time phase. There was also some other interesting moments where the namesake of the pod, Joe Budden, would point out how he was a bit frustrated by Mona taking over the show. This was in the segment before they talked about Elliot's podcast ending, the bigger picture. So he even starts to do something really abrasive and play the music. He looked frustrated throughout that whole segment. And I thought it was kind of because Mona kept rambling. And what Mona needs to do is find the pocket of how to get in and out of topics, because I think that's her biggest misstep. Now, Joe was tired of her talking, and I think Mona sensed it because she ended up being quiet for the rest of the bigger picture segment, only saying something until she let Joe speak for a few minutes, and then she would say a little quip there. And also, Joe calls out Mona for texting.
It doesn't.
Can you mark? It does. It's teams.
Mona know when to start texting basketball talk.
That's one of the biggest things that it seems like the pod doesn't like. Well, by the pod, I mean the leadership of the pod, Ian and Joe. They feel like it distracts from the show. And I do think that they should put their phones away with maybe somebody off to the side monitoring the news and then breaking news whenever they can. A little bit after that, Joe Budden calls out how Mona seemed dejected and not really participating in the conversation concerning sports.
Let's get Mona back in the game. Look, she all sad we talk about sports.
Now, this is something that's very similar to the person that Mona would have issues with, Queen's Flip. Remember Queen's Flip? Whenever there was a topic about sports, he seemed kind of aloof and always looking off to the side. So that's something to monitor. How long can Mona be engaged on the pod when it's a subject she doesn't necessarily care about? For example, I can't help but think about that time they were talking about Rory and Mona knew absolutely nothing, and she just chimed in with generalities about the whole situation and just say, it's messed up how people come in the culture and do. Like she had that whole rant ready, but she didn't have any knowledge of the actual subject. And after that, Joe would say something pretty hilarious because earlier in the episode, he said Mona needs 6 months to shape up, but then he said she actually needs 4 years. So with that type of joke, Joe Budden is realizing, hey, this may not be as easy as he thought. It's going to be really interesting to see how Joe finds ways to utilize Mona as a tool and to see if Mona's even up for the molding that the Joe Budden podcast has to offer. Mona would snap a little bit later as well because she was trying to get a topic off, and there was even another situation where Mona was saying like the funny joke about Ish's hair laser treatment, and she was trying to get this joke off for like a good few seconds. Like I'm talking about damn near a minute. And they finally let her get it off, and it was magic.
Excuse me, Ish.
Up your ass.
Ish.
Important
question. Important question.
It's up your ass.
You gotta land the strip. They get all up in there, man.
I have a question, and it's important, and I don't mean no disrespect. Is it like when you? Because I want to get laser myself. I've been, you know what I mean. Is it like a?
But that whole situation shows how Mona is being stifled and also how hard she's trying to get her comedic flair in. And this could be the reason why we see Mark fall back so much. Because a lot of people are saying, yo, Mark changed up. Mark is not the same. And that's 100% right. Mark has stepped back so he can let Mona excel. But is it like a two-star basketball players who are letting the other person go off, but they're not playing with chemistry at the same time? And we have to remember this stain that whole Flip Mark Lamont Hill argument left on Mark, because now he has to also be cautious of if he steps on Mona's toes. And I don't think he's stepping on Mona's toes. I just think he wants to make it so that she is as successful as possible. Because even if people enjoy Mark and think like, yo, he's always funny and everybody who doesn't find it funny is just stupid, if situations keep occurring where people don't get along with him, that reflects on him regardless of how people perceive it. Then a little bit later into the show, Joe Budden talks about how he was talking with Corey about who's going to show up and show out at the pod.
Me and Corey was talking bad about each and every one of y'all.
Wow.
It's true. Look,
No.
it's true.
Not y'all.
It's true. We was.
Yeah, two of the thumb.
It was really Corey, but I agree.
Now, this seemed like a joke, but I do think Corey is a bit of Joe Budden's henchman. And remember how Corey joined the podcast. He joined the podcast as a venting partner for Joe when Rory and Mal weren't exactly producing up to snuff for Joe and were also falling out with him. So please remember, whenever Corey is discussed in any type of way, it is something to watch and observe. Corey is Joe Budden's North Star. He goes to Corey whenever he has some type of topic to bounce off of him. He's the balance to Ian, who's the business side. He's the brawn. Ian's the brain. Not that I'm not saying Corey's stupid or anything like that. I'm just saying Ian has the business acumen and Corey can give him the brawn. Like, remember when that whole situation with Flip and Mark, Corey was in the background. Like, y'all not fighting, man. Y'all not really fighting, because if stuff really gets to really happening, y'all gonna see me have to activate. And that kind of settled everyone down, because it appears to me like everyone's scared of Corey. Probably rightfully so. I mean, the dude looks like Geodude. And another thing that happened on the Patreon that I thought was fascinating is Mona hinted that Breakbeat or somebody that she signed to is thinking about suing her because of something she said on air.
What could you possibly do? What could you possibly sue me for? Anything that I've said here, what could you sue me for?
It depends on what your contract says.
My contract's up.
Now, that could be any type of people, because we all know Mona has ran afoul of some people with her business dealings. Apparently, she might have been running off on people's monies and deposits based upon what Tony the Closer said. And maybe that's what she's talking about. But I get the impression that she's talking about Breakbeat Media having an issue with the way that she's discussing Breakbeat Media on the podcast. And I wonder what she said that could be taken as defamation or be taken as something that could go left. Remember, Breakbeat Media also had issues with Funny Marco. And I don't think Mona is in the proper place to be able to handle a lawsuit. So it'd be wise for her to just leave that situation alone. And we will have to see what happens next for Mona, as Mona says that she's independent and she's no longer on Breakbeat, but content from hers keeps ending up on Breakbeat months after she said her contract is over. So are all these episodes stashed? Because I swear I saw an episode that she did that was about recent topics. So I'm a bit confused, and we'll have to see what she does. Then there's the issue of, is she going to put the podcast on Joe Budden's network? I don't know. And would that even work? Because sometimes audiences don't really mix well. Like, I look at, certain podcasts that Joe tried to launch and the views were chaotic. Does Joe Budden's audience want to see Mona? I do think there's a possibility of that. Higher possibility than the other women who have been on his network, because Mona's really one of the girls guys that have been there, and she really does joke like a dude. So it might work, and we'll see how that goes. But I want to end this video with the silent minority right now. Right now, there's a silent minority of people who think that Mona talks too damn much. And Joe Budden seems to think that as well with the way he conducted himself on this pod. But I remember a few videos back, I said, I think Melissa Ford has an edge over Mona in certain regards because she lets everybody else speak and lets everyone be themselves. But with Mona, that's not necessarily the case. You know, she's overbearing when it comes to the microphone. I think she's a good person. I think she's funny. I think she's building others. But she is long-winded. She goes on tangents when there's not necessarily a need to. So even though the highs are highs, the lows can be lows, and it can mess up the chemistry of the show. All right, y'all, that's my video for now. Like I said, the last 90 to 120 minutes of the pod were special peak stuff. This might have been the first time in years that the pod became about the chemistry only and the topics was secondary. And you know what that reminds me of? The Rory and Mal era. If they're able to fine-tune and coach everything the right way, I think the next level might be coming, and we will see if the Joe Budden podcast will go on a run, as Sue Surf is coming out soon. All right, y'all, let me know what you think in the comments. Please follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. Please follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV, and tap in with my Patreon, The Stop. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace.